The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
How would you feel if during a serious illness your soul found itself in complete blackness? Would it be even scarier if thousands of frozen gray souls, their legs pulled up against their chests, passed by, staring out insanely with fixed, angry eyes? Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Today's guest on the show is Cristael Bengston, who experienced such a frightening out-of-body experience as a result of battling a devastating case of the flu. Fortunately, her experience improved dramatically after that, as she describes in the first chapter of her book, Sacred Light's Spirit Eagle. And now, here to tell us about it herself is Cristael Bengston. Cristael, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee. I'm happy to be here.
And Cristael, if you would, tell us some of the details of your near-death experience.
All right. It was in a December morning. It was very warm and very pleasant here in Los Angeles. And I was very, very sick in bed. I had a terrifically high fever that had set in all of a sudden. And as it went on during that day, I started having convulsions. I was convulsing so that I touched the bed with my head and my upper back, and then my hips and my feet, and the rest of me was just arched. And sometimes I was just the back and the toes. And I was thinking, I need to get away from this somehow. And I saw blackness coming up all around me. It was rising like high water coming up. And suddenly I just noticed that I was up out of my body. And I looked down at the bed and I sort of saw a dark space down there, and then I went up into an endless blackness, moving through it, and I kept looking all around. I was very awake, very alert. My mind was functioning better than I think it ever has. And I was saying, what is this place? Where am I? Where are you, God? What's going on here? Please, somebody, tell me what's happening. And I kept floating through this space, and I looked down and I saw that there was infinite blackness below me and all around me, and there were no stars, nothing to guide. And I just panicked, and I thought, I'm falling, and which is one of my big fears, of falling from very high places. And I was terrified. And then I closed my eyes, and I saw like an Aladdin's carpet, and it was underneath me. And I was seated on it. I was in my body. I was seated on it, and I was floating along on that. And I opened my eyes, and I looked down, and sure enough, there was a carpet underneath me with all brilliant colors. And I started to settle down. And I could hear my mother talking to me. I looked around, and I didn't see anything, but she was talking to me, and I couldn't. She kept saying, honey, would you like to come up here and be with us? We'd love it if you would come up here and be with us. And I thought, what? And I just kept looking around and saying, what is this place? Please, somebody, show me something. And then I saw these frightening creatures that you mentioned, the blue baldies, I call them, and they are seated 10 abreast and 10, like a square of 10 of them, cross-legged, and they're just moving by me in these big, I don't know, it's almost like wagons without wheels. They were just moving on by me, and they were terrifying. I didn't know what they were, but they were just frightening. And then they just sort of faded off into the distance, and I saw enormous, sort of like a big opening in the darkness, and it was huge, and it was like black on black. It was like a big flower that had opened out in front of me, and I kept coming up to that huge opening, and it was immense. And I went floating off into the inside of that cavernous opening, and I found myself in a vast cathedral with all the lights out. And by this time, once I got in there, I was very calm. All the fear was gone. And I was floating down the nave, or the aisle of that cathedral, and I was still asking questions. Where am I? What is this? What is going on? I had no idea. And my mind was just on high alert. I was searching, and with every faculty I had, and I looked down and I realized I no longer had a body. I was like a sphere, blue and white and gold. And my mother was still with me. And she kept saying, honey, wouldn't you please come up here with us? We'd love to have you up here with us. And I was very annoyed by it. And I thought, this is a case of the flu. I've gotten over the flu before. What's the big deal? And so pinpoint of light started coming towards me about then. It was like a huge, and it turned out as it came closer, it was like a huge door on its side, or an envelope. And a light sphere floated through that door and towards me and stopped in front of me. And I looked up at it and I said, everything up here is so bloody big. Because I was beginning to realize I was really somewhere I had never been before. And the light had radiant patterns all over it. It had like golden caterpillars of energies flowing all over its surface. And they were like thought concepts. They were star-like webs of pure thought branching out all over the surface of the light. And they were fuzzy looking. And I thought, am I nearsighted even when I'm out of my body? And then my mother's voice again said, please come up here and be with us. And I thought, oh, Mother. And then she faded into the distance, and the light just enveloped me. There were waterfalls of light. There were huge waves of light. And they were all around me, and it was like I reached out and touched the light, and I felt like a newborn at its mother's breast. It was absolute peace, absolute peace. And I thought, where am I? And I was astounded when I got an answer. The thought concept I got, and this is just my translation, you might say. It didn't use the English language. It was a pure thought. Said, now you are beholding the imperial heaven, the heart of God, the great master awareness that overflows to create all that is. And we kept floating there for a little ways, and then there was like a curtain that opened out in the front of the light ahead of me, and I was suddenly in a great school, in like a beautiful garden, and with buildings all around, departments, say music department, humanities, etc. And I was walking along, and I found myself in a large, almost like an empty auditorium, and it had a parquet floor, and in the center of that floor was an enormous crystal, and it was sending out rays of light all around it. And I found myself walking across that floor to the golden crystal, and every time I stepped on the floor, it was almost like a chime that came out. And I put my hands on the great crystal when I got there, and then I put my forehead, I felt impelled to put my forehead there, and suddenly I was inside the crystal, and I was seeing in every facet of the crystal scenes from my babyhood on up. I saw my parents' love for me and for each other. I saw my mother's yearning for another baby. I saw my whole life just literally was there. It was all there all at once. And I could see huge gaps and ragged tears in my life plan where it had been disrupted by events that had apparently not been planned by the higher beings, but they had happened. And then I had in my cupped hands inside, I was still inside that multicolored, great colored crystal, but I saw a multicolored jewel of ruby and gold, and I saw my grandmother teaching me how to paint, oil paint, which happened when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And then suddenly I remember being back in front of that light, just as I had been before it wrapped itself around me, and I looked up at the light, and I said, what is the meaning of what I've been seeing? And the awareness then hit me, right here, right now, I could die. And I was shocked it was like I was being given the choice. And I was stunned for a moment or two, and then I said to the light, wait a minute, I've been a teacher. I love making goals and objectives and all kinds of plans, and I've been doing that, and I've had 10 years of goals ahead of me, and broken down into 1 month and 1 day, and nowhere in all my goals and to-dos is there anything that says, today I die. And then I realized how much I wanted to stay there. And I also realized that I was being scanned in depth by that light. And it was, the light was saying how well, saying how well are you holding up down there? And I saw my mother's grief at parting me, leaving me when she passed on, and mother's grief at that moment, knowing I could not stay up there with her. And the life asked me, what is it that's holding you down on earth? And I remember seeing my son come into my bedroom and finding me dead, totally unexpectedly. And that was it. I said, that's not going to happen. And I said to the light, I have 2 sons, a daughter-in-law, a grandson that I want to see go to college and get married and have kids of his own. I have work to do, writing, singing that I want to do. I really have to go back. I have to be there. And so the light suddenly just gave me a blessing. It was like it approved my choice. And it went zooming off into the distance. And I thought, wait a minute, I've got so many questions. Can we talk? And it went right on off. And it was gone. And then I was falling down into my body, whirling around and around, seeing those brilliant pictures again, all around me like tiny kaleidoscopes. It was almost like a bunch of television screens in front of me, and I was circling around from one to another. And I remembered everything about my life at that moment. And as I came down, I knew that I am only a small part of me. I am a tiny part of a far greater intelligence that is wiser and vaster and kinder than the everyday me. I was aware of more facets of myself. And then I was back in my body again, and I was in terrible pain. And I kept crying out, help me, please help me. And I saw beautiful blue hands, like the praying hands that they have in photographs, and that were all around me. And they were just the hands. They were dipping into every part of me, getting something out, which was pretty disgusting looking. And then I passed out. I just lost consciousness. And then when I came to again, and I don't know how long that was, I was sitting up in my bed, and I was having a cold sweat all over, and I thought, oh, good, the fever has broken, and it had. And I healed up faster from that really bad case of flu than I had ever healed before. I was ready to go in days. And that was my near-death experience.
Amazing. Now, let me ask you, let me take you back first to those gray blue souls that you passed by. What do you think put them where they were? Why hadn't they experienced what you did?
I think that what happened, when I saw them, I remember looking at one of them, and it was like this hate was looking back at me. I mean, I never saw such hate. He couldn't touch me, but he was hating me. And I looked at him, and I realized I saw a vision of when I was back in college during the 60s, during the time when all the uproar was going on. I remember seeing 3 young people there who were 2 women and 1 young man, and he looked at me with that kind of hate in his eyes, and I realized that they were all 3 of them on drugs, and he especially was hating me, and it was pure hate. And it was that same pure hate that I saw there. So I think that people who are really, really lost their way in very difficult ways through drug abuse, through who knows what.
It's interesting that they would be lined up, squared off 10 by 10, and almost like troops on a battlefield or or marching on a parade. Do you think they were stuck on Earth? Are they like ghosts?
No, I didn't. They were apart from Earth, but they were not able to get out of the darkness, which was a terrifying place to be. But I don't know that they were aware of all that much.
Right.
For the most part, they seemed to be just fixated on nothing, staring at nothingness.
Now, here's another question for you. Why do you suppose your mother lobbied so hard for you to join her? Not, of course it's because she loves you, but also I wonder if didn't she think that there was more for you to experience, both in your NDE and also with your life on Earth?
That's a very good question. What I got from her was a really great big fear of all the upheaval on Earth. And this was back in 1998, so this was, things were pretty peaceful at that time. And I kept feeling that she didn't want me to go through this upheaval that was coming up. And I remember thinking, "Oh, come on, Mom, there's no upheaval going on. What do you mean?" But she was very, very concerned about what might happen.
I guess I can understand that, especially in light of what's happening in the world right now.
Yes, I mean, I thought about that in 2001 when we had, 9/11, and that came back to me vividly. So, yeah, that may have been a little bit of foreseeing there, although I didn't see anything about that. But certainly the things that she worried about, whatever they were, seemed to have been justified.
When you spoke about a web of pure thought, I thought that was really an interesting image. It's like a web across the sphere of light, or this crystal light that you saw. Is that? Gosh, it sounds almost Platonic. It sounds like a mixture of East and Western thought in a way that thought itself would be visible. Have you had any reflections on that?
My goodness. That's very interesting. I've been reading Plato lately, a little bit at a time. And, yes, the Platonic ideas, the Platonic forms, if that's what you're referring to. Yes, that's, wow, yes. I mean, these were the thoughts, and you could see out of that thought, there would have been no surprise to see many things being generated by that thought. That those thoughts, the caterpillar thoughts flowing over the surface of this immense sphere of light, immense and very loving. Very loving.
It was very interesting that as you describe it, you're going through first like a large gate, and then you're going through a large cathedral, and then you're going into a crystal. It's piercing. It's going further and further and further inward, really, in the description. And then of course you're cast out again, back down to your body. But that, I wonder if that is, in part reflected in how we look into our own hearts and souls when we're trying to really understand the nature of life and what we're all about, that inward journey. Do you see that as sort of a mirror to what your NDE experience was?
Oh, what a wonderful thought. That has so much truth in it. Because, God is not limited by human logic, and we are at the same time a physical body, at the same time we are a thought. We are God's thoughts. And when I went up there and went farther and farther up there, I became more and more of a sphere, more and more of a thought. I could see that side, or that from that aspect of myself. And as far as going inward, new levels of consciousness were being awoken in me all the time I was up there. And some I still don't know what they were all about. but I do know that I was awoken to myself as having been more loved than I had realized by the adults around me, particularly my grandmother. My dad and mother I knew loved me. My grandmother I knew cared about me, but, there was something special there, much more than I had realized. And so I also had a sense of profound compassion that was there for me and for all, that there was this sense by this intelligence of reaching out to everyone, and with great compassion, with great concern, and also, interestingly enough, this great light, which I came to think of later on as the Archangel Gabriel, there was also like a tough love to it, like a really tough, terrific coach. You know what I mean?
Yes,
If you're in athletics, there's that coach that's going to get the best out of you to get that ball through the basket, and whether you like it or not. And very much like that.
So now you're back. How has this, in your book, which is primarily the story of your life, it's very interesting too, especially to me because I love that area of the country that you're describing, Arizona, New Mexico, and the life you lived out there with your family. But how did the NDE affect your life after that? I know the book is sprinkled with some visions. You had one of drowning in the ocean, and someone saves you, and you meet Jesus, who tells you you'll be safe here. Maybe you could tell us a little about that one.
Yes, I thought, gee, which vision is that? Okay, yes, that's happened when I was teaching, and I had a couple of principals who were bound and determined they were going to try and get me fired. For whatever reason, they didn't want me there. And they told me so. Within 3 weeks, if there's not a total change, we will recommend that you not be put under contract for next year. So I went home that evening in shock, and I just got out the Bible, and I knelt down in front of the couch in my living room, and then I just kind of sat on the floor there, and I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything except to reach out and say, help me. Help me. That was all I could say. And I saw suddenly I was in a very deep, rough water, like waves pounding on me, and I was lost. There was nothing around except storm and waves, and I kept coming up to the surface of the water after being dunked by one wave after the next, and rolling over and being tossed around. And I knew that if I went down again, I was going to drown. And all of a sudden, I was up on a beach, and what had happened is that I'd been grabbed by the back of the neck, literally grabbed, and I looked around, and there was the Christ smiling at me. And all of a sudden, I was up on that beach, and I looked around, and I saw two figures. One was the figure of the Christ, and the other was the figure of a man who was dressed in sort of a long furry outfit of some kind, and he had a long stick, and he was making some kind of signs in the sand of the beach. And the water had simply gone calm and quiet. The sky was clear and blue. Everything was beautiful. And then this furry kind of man just picked me up and piggyback, as it were, and he began running over the rocks around the beach and running over some very rough areas, very narrow between a cliffside and an ocean. And he brought me over to another place where there was a very clear inlet, kind of like a bay, and an inlet, very, very clear and beautiful water, and very peaceful. And he stood there beside me, and I could see out there that there were whales migrating out in the larger ocean, and one of those whales was a little baby whale, a white whale, and she was bouncing around the inlet trying to get out there with the bigger whales, and she couldn't. And I looked over at that angel and said, she wants to get out. And he said, this will be a good place for her. She'll be able to grow here. And then that was it. That was the end of the vision. And I got up and went to bed, and the next morning I went to school, and during lunch break I talked to the teachers about what had happened, and they said, go see Louise, a master teacher. They said, she will help you. And the upshot of it was that I was not only not fired, the principals that had done this were called into North Area office, and I think he must have been dressed down because he kind of jerked his head around away from me and didn't look at me every time he saw me after that. And I was transferred to another school where I had a wonderful time with an absolutely fantastic teacher and a great body of teaching staff that was really, it was a time when I was in a very peaceful harbor. And I got a lot done. Loved it.
So you were the baby white whale yourself.
I was. That was what they were showing me. This is what I got from that.
I think I have time for just one more question. Unfortunately, it's the half hour goes very quickly. When you're in one past life memory you had, you were on a boat in Egypt, and you related, and it was like a funeral boat for your uncle, who must have been a great man, and you recognized that his soul was probably your mother's soul as well.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little about that?
Yes, I saw myself, this is when my mother was dying, and I was taking care of her. I was all alone there. It was night, and I was just, one of those lows that you hit when you have something like that to deal with day after day. And I went into my room, and I got out the Bible and started to sit down at a table, and it was right up against the white wall, and as I looked at the wall, I saw a picture that just simply enveloped me. It came out of the wall. I don't know how to say this, but it was all around me. And I was a young man back in ancient Egypt, and I was on this boat that it had hawsers, I guess you call them, huge ropes that attached it to a much larger barge in front of it. And there were people all around me, and they were pulling handfuls of like dust up out of containers and throwing them on their hair as an expression of grief and sorrow. And I was the nephew of the man in the boat ahead of me, and he had been a soldier, and he had soldiers, in fact, on either side of his coffin. And I could look up and see it ahead of me, and they were standing like at attention. He was, I knew that he had been, like you say, a great man. And we were going up the river, and all of us, and more and more, it became more and more intense. I mean, they had professional mourners who were going through their sharp cries, and everybody was breaking down and sobbing, and the grief that they had in them was coming up very much. And the priest came and told me that I had to go lift that heavy rope off whatever was holding it to our boat, to that barge ahead. I had to lift both of those on either side, and I didn't want to do it. I fell down to the deck, and I said, I can't. And the priest said, you must. So I did, with enormous physical effort that I didn't think I could do. But I did that with both of the ropes that attached us to the barge ahead, and it started pulling away. It was like we were in a very broad area. It was like a lake almost. And that the barge ahead of us started turning towards the east, and our boat came after it and turned towards the east. We were headed towards the east, but our boat stopped, and the barge went on ahead, just as the sun was coming up.
And so this was very much like letting go of your mother's life.
Yes, it was. And I realized when I came back that what I had done in that life was what I was doing in this life again.
Yeah.
And
Crystal,
Yes.
Sadly, we're out of time.
This is wonderful.
Tell the listeners how they can get a copy of your book.
Just go on Amazon.com to Sacred Light, Spirit Eagle. And my name is hard to spell and hard to pronounce, but Sacred Light, Spirit Eagle by Cristael Ann Bengston. And it's there.
Very good. Well, Cristael, thank you so much for describing your NDE and how it's affected your life. And for the folks out there, if they'd like to listen again to this or any of our past shows, just go to our website at nderadio.org. And for more information about the work of IANDS, check out their website, iands.org, and tune in next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.